Excuse me. All right, class. This is just another example of how to analyze a poem. It's going to be Sherman Alexie's the Facebook sonnet. Again, anytime you analyze a poem, you begin with the title. You start from top to bottom. From the title alone, we obviously know this is going to be a Facebook, and we obviously know this is going to be a sonnet. So, what you need to understand about a sonnet is, a sonnet, depending on if it's a Shakespearean or a Spenserian sonnet, it just depends. But generally, it's 14 lines. It generally has a rhyme scheme, usually something like A B A B. In other words, the line one rhymes with the end of line three. The end of line two rhymes with the end of line four. And generally you have kind of a setup called the thesis where it puts one idea forward, and then you have what's called the antithesis where it even argues against that. And then oftentimes at the end, you have the volta or the turn, the final two lines of the poem where a point is made. Now, those characteristics aren't always there, but sometimes they are. Sometimes there's just one concept throughout the whole thing, and then it punches you hard at the end with the volta. Volta, VOLTA, means jumping off point, or basically where it gets kind of intense. So basically, we know this is going to be a sonnet. It's going to have some of those characteristics of sonnet. It's going to be about Facebook. So let's start at the beginning. Welcome to the endless high school reunion. Um, I think you guys are probably a little young to have you haven't really gone to a high school reunion yet. Probably many people, but that's definitely starting off with a negative tone. The idea of endless. Generally high school reunions are something that are extremely stressful to people. They concern themselves with, what if I go back to this place and everybody's judging me on, you know, what job I have or how I look, or have I gone bald, or have I gone gained weight, or whatever. And it's generally for a lot of people kind of a stressful event, because people seem to think of you in the same terms as when you were in high school. So like you haven't changed or grown as a person. So you guys may not be be familiar with that yet, but the word endless is starting a negative tone to the poem here. And that's something worth being analyzed. That one word, is basically, it's comparing Facebook to an endless high school reunion. So all those negative things that come with high school reunion, and positive things, like seeing people you haven't seen in a while, that's the circumstance, that's the setup we're doing here. That's the metaphor that's going to run through the entire poem, which you call an extended metaphor, which means that it's a metaphor that's going to start at the beginning of the poem and go all the way to the end. Welcome to past friends and lovers, however kind or cruel. Again, we have this rhyme scheme, this continuing, which is traditional for a sonnet. And again, we have this mix of both positive and negative, past friends and lovers, kind or cruel, good and bad things. So again, that tone is mixed here, both positive and negative, right? But what's starting to build here, and what you'll see by the end of this, is kind of a sarcastic, cynical view of Facebook. That it's overall this kind of negative thing, even though it has positive aspects. Now, this is interesting. Now, when you analyze, you want to tear down and discuss individual words. And this line especially is important. Let's undervalue and unmend, stanza break, which creates a pause, the present. All right, that pause, that stanza break, even though it's not a word on the page, is something that can be analyzed because it creates an audible pause. You're supposed to pause when you read poetry at punctuation and at stanza breaks and line breaks, and that creates a big pause to set up that dramatic reveal of the words the present. Let's undervalue and unmend the present. So how do you undervalue? How do you unmend something? Well, basically what it's saying is that Facebook causes people to undervalue their present lives, that they unmend their present lives, the present tense. And so how do you unmend? To mend is to fix something. So to unmend is to tear it apart, to break it. So in other words, Facebook causes people to undervalue and unmend the present. And it's worth mentioning that how those two words function is being very critical of Facebook. Now, the poet Sherman Alexie, who's a guy, by the way. A lot of people think he's a woman. He's a male Native American writer who wrote the book that Smoke Signals, the movie, was based on, just so you know. Um, why can't we pretend every stage of life is the same? Again, this is critical. You got to think about what he's asking. Why can't we pretend every stage of life is the same? In other words, that there's no growth. That why can't we just keep things as they are? And then this next line is extremely important as well. Let's exhume, resume, and extend. Line break creates a pause to add emphasis to the word childhood. Let's exhume, resume, and extend childhood. In other words, in your essay, if you chose this poem, you would want to discuss what exhume means. The way you do that is, and resume and extend as well. The way you do that when you write an essay is you make the subject of the sentence the word that you're going to analyze, and make, or the aspect of the poem that you're going to analyze, you make it do the verb. Let's exhume. How do you exhume childhood? What does exhume mean? Well, to exhume, is typically when, you hear the word exhume, it means to uncover something. Typically it's used when you exhume a body, like in a homicide investigation. You dig up a body that's already been buried and you analyze it again. So, in other words, that one word says, okay, let's take childhood, something that's been buried in the past, and let's dig it up and look at it. And then you have the word resume. Okay, let's resume childhood. In other words, Facebook causes you to behave like a child. And let's extend childhood, same thing, right? So let's all play the games that occupy the young, right? So, in other words, Facebook causes you to play games that young people, teenagers, petty childhood games, social games, whatever, you guys can kind of plug in what that might be. But again, this is a cynical portrayal of Facebook. And this next line, let fame and shame intertwine. Again, this line is being used to be critical of the way that Facebook often, can make people famous, but often also for very shameful deeds. Embarrassing that the two typically are kind of the same on Facebook. If you become famous on Facebook, it's probably because you did something shameful that embarrasses you. Again, let one search for God become public domain. Usually religion is something that should be intensely private and spiritual, but Facebook's the kind of place where people put that all out there in the open. Maybe even use it to kind of advertise their religiousness. So if you're analyzing this, like an example of what you might write in an essay is, when Sherman Alexie states that one's search for God becomes public domain on Facebook, he's being critical of the way that people flaunt their religion. Uh, right? So that's like a good analytical sentence. Let church.com become our church. So, when you analyze, remember you're asking yourself, why did the author put this there? How does it work? What is it? Like, what all kinds of things can I think about it? So, what is the phrase let church.com become our church? Is that stating that Facebook, is replacing the technology, church.com, with the actual experience of church, that our lives are being replaced by the virtual experience instead of the realistic experience of being out in life? Is it, what exactly does this do? How does this function? And how does it relate to the idea that this poem is about Facebook and critical of Facebook? That's your goal in analysis. So here at the end, we have the volta, the jumping off part, the final punch to the reader. And it's, let's sign up, sign in, and confess here at the altar of loneliness. This clearly cements, with the tone, that this is a negative criticism of Facebook. So, how do you write that? Well, you would say something like the final, rhyming couplet or lines of this poem, really cement the negative tone and the critical aspect of this poem, how it criticizes Facebook. You know, that Facebook is the altar of loneliness. That it is, a religion dedicated to loneliness. That it isolates people. All you have to do is sign up and sign in and confess all your life on Facebook, right? So, this is essentially, how you analyze. You can also discuss how the punctuation, the commas, the periods, the line breaks, the stanzas create pauses, and what that does for the rhythm, what that does for the reading experience. But just remember, when you write this analysis, your goal is not to summarize what happens in the poem, but discuss how parts of the poem work, how line breaks or how certain words function and what they mean and what they do for the reader's experience, how they create tone or how they create, imagery or how they create meaning or how they all build together to create this cynical poem about Facebook. And that's your goal with analysis. So I hope this is helpful.